I am the person who always found a way to pay the bills, to cover the unexpected expenses, to help when someone in the family came up short. For decades, I lived quietly in Denver, Colorado, working long hours as an accountant at a small company, and doing everything I could to make sure my husband and my 2 children never lacked for anything. On the outside, my life looked steady and uneventful. On the inside, I carried the weight of sacrifices no one seemed to notice. If you are listening to this, I want you to think about one question. If you were suddenly handed a fortune big enough to change your life forever, who would you trust with that secret? Who would you share it with? For me, that question was not hypothetical. One ordinary Tuesday evening, I checked a lottery ticket and discovered that I was the sole winner of $47 million. In a single moment, my life transformed from careful budgeting and quiet worries to possibilities I had never dared to dream about. My heart raced, my hands shook, and I felt as if the ground beneath me had shifted. Most people might expect celebration, champagne, or a shopping spree, but my very first thought was different. I decided not to tell anyone, not my husband, not my children, not even my closest friends. After years of giving and giving, often to people who never gave back, I needed to know the truth. I needed to know who would stand by me when I had nothing to offer, before I revealed that I suddenly had everything. This is the story of how a mother tested the loyalty of her family and uncovered truths that were both painful and liberating. It is about the courage to see clearly the heartbreak of disappointment and the surprising places where love and loyalty truly live, and it all began with a secret I never thought I would have to keep. Before that winning ticket fell into my hands, my life was as ordinary as anyone could imagine. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom townhouse on the edge of Denver. The neighborhood was safe but unremarkable, the kind of place where lawns were mowed on Saturdays and neighbors waved politely without ever really knowing one another. My days followed a steady rhythm. I woke early, brewed my coffee, and drove my aging sedan to the accounting firm where I had worked for over 20 years. The job paid enough to cover rent, groceries, and the endless stream of bills, but there was never much left at the end of the month. Vacations were rare, dinners out were occasional, and every dollar was carefully tracked in my planner. My husband, Edward, ran a small contracting business. On paper, he looked successful, but in reality he was obsessed with holding on to money, rather than using it wisely. He reminded me constantly that his earnings were his alone, and anything he contributed toward our household was framed as a favor rather than a responsibility. Conversations about finances often ended with me shouldering the burden, dipping into my savings, or tightening the budget so that no one else had to go without. I had 2 children who had long since grown into adults. David, my son, was 32 and still searching for direction. He had taken jobs here and there, but nothing ever seemed to stick. He often called with desperate voices and long explanations, borrowing from me to cover overdue rent or unpaid bills. Promises to repay were always sincere in the moment, yet nothing ever returned. Emily, my daughter, was 29 and lived in the suburbs with her husband, a surgeon. Their home was beautiful, their lifestyle comfortable, and their children adored. But comfort had made her distant, and when I reached out, I often felt as though my needs were an inconvenience she would rather not acknowledge. There was one person I could always count on, though she had the least to give. My younger sister Linda taught at an elementary school. Her pay barely stretched across rent and medical expenses, but she never failed to show up when I needed a hand, or simply a kind word. She lived simply in a small apartment filled with books, plants, and laughter, and though she never had extra money, she shared what she did have without hesitation. This was the life I knew before everything changed, modest, predictable, and marked by a constant undercurrent of quiet sacrifice. I had long accepted that this was the role I would always play, the steady one, the giver, the person others leaned on. I had no idea how quickly that image of myself was about to be challenged. The night it happened was my 56th birthday. I had stopped at the corner store on my way home, more out of habit than expectation. For years, buying a few lottery tickets each week had been my one small indulgence. My family laughed at me for it. Edward called it a waste, David joked that I should just hand him the money instead, and Emily insisted that only people who did not understand math bothered with such things. Still, I liked the quiet hope it carried. That night, after a long day at the office, I poured myself a cup of tea, sat down at the kitchen table, and pulled out my ticket. I checked the numbers once, twice, 3 times. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the announcer on the television. Every single number matched, At first, I thought it must be some kind of mistake, but it was no mistake. I was holding the winning ticket for $47 million. I sat frozen, the ticket trembling in my hands, my mind spinning in disbelief. I wanted to scream, to cry, to celebrate, but instead I sat there in silence, the weight of what it meant pressing down on me. The internet was filled with cautionary tales, winners who went bankrupt within a few years, families torn apart by greed, friendships destroyed. The more I read, the more I realized the danger of telling anyone too soon. Money changes people. Or maybe, I thought, it simply reveals who they already are. I remembered all the times I had drained my savings to bail out my son, or put expenses on a credit card to help my daughter, or covered household bills that Edward refused to claim as his responsibility. None of them had ever considered what those sacrifices had cost me. The more I thought, the clearer it became. If I told them now, my life would no longer be my own. The very next morning I called an attorney, a man named Richard Palmer, who specialized in financial planning for lottery winners. He spoke with calm authority, explaining how I could claim the prize through a trust that would keep my identity private. We mapped out a plan to invest the money wisely, to secure my future, and to prevent anyone from gaining access except me. By the time I left his office, the shock was giving way to a quiet determination. This was my chance to rewrite the story of my life. Yet one question haunted me: who in my family truly loved me for who I was, and not for what I could provide? I needed to know before I let them into this new chapter, and so I decided on a test. I would tell them that I had lost my job, that I was behind on bills and facing medical expenses, that I needed $5,000 to keep afloat. It was a believable story, not too dramatic, but serious enough to reveal their true intentions. I would ask each of them the same way I had been asked so many times before, and then, at last, I would see the truth. The first person I approached was Edward, my husband. After all, if anyone should stand by me in hard times, it ought to be the man who promised to share a life with me. I waited until after dinner, when he was reading through some business papers at the dining table. My voice shook just enough to sound believable as I told him that my company had suddenly closed and I was out of work. I explained that I had a few medical bills and the rent coming due, and I needed about $5,000 to get through the next few months. He lowered his glasses, gave me a look that felt colder than ice, and shook his head. "You know, Margaret, I worked hard for every cent I have. If you are struggling, maybe it's time you learn to live within your means. I don't expect me to dip into my money just because you didn't plan ahead." His words pierced deeper than he could imagine. After everything I had covered for him, after all the bills I paid quietly, there was not even a pause of consideration. I excused myself before tears betrayed me, writing down his answer in the journal I had begun for this experiment. Next, I called my daughter Emily. She invited me over to her suburban home the following Saturday, and I tried to keep my nerves steady as I told my story across her spotless marble kitchen island. Emily gasped, reaching across the counter to squeeze my hand. "Oh, Mom, that's terrible." "I'm so sorry." For a moment I let myself believe she might come through, but then she glanced away and began to explain. "You know, this really isn't a good time. We just bought the new SUV, and the twins' private school tuition is due. Plus, we are remodeling the kitchen. Paul handles most of our finances, and he doesn't like unexpected expenses." She promised to talk with her husband, maybe offer a smaller amount, but the way she avoided my eyes told me everything. Sympathy without sacrifice. A gentle no wrapped in comforting words. My son David was next, and his reaction stung in a different way. I sent him a long message explaining my situation. Hours passed without a reply. Finally, a short text came back. "That sucks, Mom. I'm really strapped right now too. I'll call you later." The call never came. Repeated messages went unanswered, and when I finally tried phoning him, the call went straight to voicemail. Silence. This from the child I had bailed out more times than I could count, the one who had cried over the phone begging for rent money just a year earlier. I closed my eyes, realizing that his pattern of disappearing when I needed him was the clearest answer of all. I turned next to Edward's sister, Heather. I had little expectation, but I wanted to see her reaction. When I told her my situation, she gave a sharp laugh. "Margaret, I always said you lived above your means. You should have listened to my advice years ago. Maybe now you'll finally learn." She offered no help, only judgment, and by that evening I heard through family chatter that she had been spreading gossip about my poor choices. I wrote it down in my journal with a heavy hand, the ink smudging where my grip had pressed too hard. My nephew Ryan gave me a brief moment of false hope. When I called, He responded with kindness, telling me he would definitely help out. We agreed to meet for lunch where he promised to bring a check, but the morning of our meeting, a text arrived. Something came up, let's reschedule. Days turned to weeks, and no follow-up ever came. Eventually, he stopped answering altogether. Another empty promise added to the list. At this point, the experiment was wearing me thin. The repeated rejections, the excuses, the silences, they piled up like stones on my chest. I found myself wondering if I had made a mistake by starting this test at all. Yet there was one person left on my list, the one I both dreaded and longed to call. My younger sister Linda. She was the only person I knew who truly struggled financially, living on a teacher's salary while managing her health issues. Asking her for money felt cruel, but I needed to know. Before I had the chance, my phone rang. It was Linda. I heard from Emily that you lost your job, she said, her voice full of worry. Are you okay? Tears pricked my eyes. She had called me first, not waiting to be asked. We arranged to meet at a small diner near her apartment the next day. When she slid into the booth, she took my hands in hers. I don't know how you're holding up, but I want to help. After we ate, she reached into her worn purse and placed an envelope on the table. It's $3,000. I know it's not the full amount, but it should cover your rent for a while. I stared at her in disbelief. This woman, who drove an old car that rattled every time it started, who clipped coupons just to afford groceries, was offering me nearly everything she had saved. I can't take this, Linda, I whispered, my throat tight. She shook her head. Family helps family. And if you need a place to stay, my couch pulls out. It's not fancy, but it's yours. For the first time during this experiment, the tears came without restraint, not because of rejection, but because of overwhelming gratitude. Linda had the least, yet gave the most. Her love came without conditions, without excuses, without delay. I walked away from that diner with an envelope of money and a heart full of clarity. The experiment was complete, and the results could not have been clearer. Out of everyone I had asked, my husband, my children, extended family, only Linda had stepped forward. The truth I had feared was now undeniable. The people I had sacrificed for over and over again were nowhere to be found when I needed them. But the one person who had never asked for anything in return was the one who showed me what loyalty truly meant. That evening, after leaving the diner, I sat in my car for a long time. The envelope of money rested on the passenger seat, heavier than gold. I knew how hard Linda had worked for every dollar. I knew about the tutoring jobs she took after school, the weekends she spent grading papers, and the medical bills she quietly managed on her own. And yet, when she thought I was in need, she offered it all without a second thought. The contrast between her actions and everyone else's excuses burned into me like a brand. I could not let this moment pass without telling her the truth. The next day I invited her to my townhouse for dinner. I kept it simple, just a homemade soup and bread, but my heart was pounding as we sat down at the table. After a while, I pushed the untouched envelope back across to her. Linda, I need to confess something, I said. She looked at me curiously, concern in her eyes. I took a deep breath. I didn't lose my job. I wasn't behind on rent. The truth is, I won the lottery 3 weeks ago. $47 million. I made up the story because I needed to know who in my family would really be there for me. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth, then she set it down gently. For a moment she was silent, and I braced myself for anger, disappointment, or hurt. Instead, she reached across the table and held my hand. I'm not angry, she said softly. Sad, maybe, that you felt you had to test people this way, but I understand why. You've been carrying so much alone for so long. Tears filled my eyes. You were the only one, Linda? The only person who offered help without hesitation. Everyone else turned away. She squeezed my hand firmly. People show their true selves when it costs them something. That's when you know who really cares. Then she told me something I had never known. Years ago, after our grandmother passed, Linda had received a small inheritance. Her ex-husband had taken it without her consent, investing it in a failing business. When she confronted him, he said, "It was our money, not yours." That betrayal had left her with almost nothing. I learned the hard way, she told me, that money doesn't change who someone is. It only reveals it. And it reveals who we are too, by what we choose to do with it. Her words settled into me like truth carved in stone. At that moment I made a decision. I want you to know something, Linda, I said. You will never have to worry again. Your medical bills, your retirement, your home, everything. I'm going to make sure you're cared for. She smiled gently and shook her head. "I don't need anything from you, Margaret. Just knowing you are safe and happy is enough for me." That humility, that genuine love, moved me more than anything else. For the first time since holding that winning ticket, I felt peace. I had found the person who truly deserved to share in my new life. A week later, I decided to call a family meeting. I invited Edward, Emily, David, and even a few extended relatives who had heard rumors about my financial struggles. I prepared my small living room with extra chairs, a pot of coffee, and plates of cookies, though I knew the atmosphere would be tense. When everyone arrived, they looked around curiously, expecting perhaps another request for money. I stood in front of them, my hands steady for the first time in years. "I want to clear the air," I began. "I know many of you have heard that I lost my job and was struggling. That story was true in part, but here is what matters. When I asked for help, I learned who I could depend on." The room fell quiet. Emily glanced at her husband with a nervous smile. David looked down at his phone. Edward folded his arms, his expression unreadable. When I needed support, I received excuses, lectures, and silence. Except from one person, I turned toward Linda, who sat quietly near the corner. My sister stepped up without hesitation, even though she had the least to give. A heavy silence hung in the room. Stephanie, Edward's sister, finally spoke. "We all have our own commitments. It's not always possible to help, even if we want to," I nodded calmly. "Of course. Everyone has to make choices, and your choices told me everything I needed to know." David shifted uncomfortably. Emily murmured that she would have helped if she'd had more notice. Edward muttered about financial responsibility, but none of their words changed the truth. I no longer needed their approval. For the first time, I felt free. The meeting ended in awkward goodbyes, but in my heart, the weight had lifted. 1 year later, my life looked nothing like it had before. I moved into a modest but beautiful home with a small garden where I spent my mornings drinking coffee in peace. Just a few blocks away, Linda now lived in a cozy single-story house I purchased for her, one with wide doorways and space for her to breathe easily. She no longer worried about medical bills or retirement. Instead, she volunteered at a literacy program, still doing what she loved most, sharing knowledge and kindness. With part of my winnings, I started a nonprofit dedicated to helping elderly people who lived alone, inspired by Linda's selflessness. We offered companionship, home repairs, and financial assistance to seniors often forgotten by their own families. The work gave me a sense of purpose that money alone never could. As for Edward and my children, I kept relationships polite but distant. They never learned about the lottery, and they never will. I no longer felt the need to buy their love or approval. The money gave me security, but the real gift was clarity. True family, I realized, is not defined by blood or obligation. It is defined by presence, loyalty, and love without condition. Before we close, I want to leave you with the lesson this journey carved deep into my heart. Wealth did not change my family. It did not turn selfish people into takers or generous ones into givers. It simply revealed what was already there, hidden behind words and appearances. When I had nothing, most of those closest to me chose to walk away. But the one person with the least to spare gave me almost everything she had. That was the moment I understood, real love does not keep score, and real loyalty does not come with conditions. So let me ask you, have you ever tested the loyalty of those around you, even in small ways? What did you discover? Sometimes the answers are painful, but they also give us freedom, the freedom to stop chasing approval from people who will never give it, and to invest our hearts in those who truly stand by us. If this story spoke to you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need the reminder, and leave a comment below about your own experience. Remember, your worth is not measured by what you give away,